By 1942, the world was already consumed by war. Across Europe, Africa, and Asia, armies clashed on an unprecedented scale. But far out in the Pacific Ocean, another conflict was rapidly growing. Few people realized that a single battle, fought in a remote stretch of water, would soon alter the course of history. Japan had spent years expanding across Asia. Its military victories came quickly and repeatedly. Cities fell, territories surrendered. To many observers, the Japanese Empire seemed unstoppable. Every success increased its confidence and pushed its leaders toward even more ambitious goals. On December 7th, 1941, Japanese aircraft struck Pearl Harbor. Explosions ripped through battleships anchored in Hawaii. Within hours, America found itself fully at war. The attack was a tactical success for Japan, but it also awakened an industrial giant that would not back down. Following Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces swept across the Pacific. Island after island fell under their control. Allied defenses crumbled. Military analysts wondered whether anyone could stop the empire's advance. Confidence within Japanese leadership reached new heights. Although damaged, the United States was rebuilding quickly. Factories worked around the clock. New ships entered production. Pilots trained relentlessly. Behind the scenes, military leaders searched for a way to halt Japan's seemingly unstoppable advance before it became too powerful. Japanese commanders wanted a decisive victory. They believed one more crushing blow could eliminate America's remaining carriers and secure control of the Pacific. Their chosen target was a tiny island that appeared insignificant on the map. Midway Atoll sat alone in the vast Pacific Ocean. Small, remote, and seemingly unimportant, it served as a critical American outpost. To Japanese planners, capturing Midway would lure American carriers into a trap and finish them once and for all. While fleets moved across the ocean, another battle unfolded in secret. Deep inside intelligence centers, American codebreakers intercepted Japanese communications. Every message offered a clue. Every clue brought them closer to uncovering Japan's next move. Again and again, Japanese messages mentioned a location called AF. Intelligence officers knew it was important, but no one could identify it with certainty. The future of the Pacific might depend on solving a simple mystery hidden within enemy communications. American intelligence devised an unusual test. Midway sent an uncoded radio message claiming its water system had failed. Soon afterward, Japanese communications reported that AF was suffering a water shortage. The mystery was solved. AF was Midway, and America now knew where the attack was coming. Admiral Chester W. Nimitz now faced a difficult choice. The intelligence seemed convincing, but betting America's remaining carriers on a single prediction was incredibly risky. If the codebreakers were wrong, the Pacific Fleet could be destroyed. If they were right, America had a chance to change the war. Nimitz made his choice. America would not wait for Japan to strike. Instead, its carriers would secretly move into position near Midway. It was a bold gamble. The fate of the Pacific now rested on a handful of ships hidden somewhere in the vast ocean. The American carriers slipped quietly across the Pacific. Radio silence was strictly enforced. Sailors understood the importance of secrecy. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Japanese fleet was advancing, unaware that its prey was already waiting. Japanese commanders believed their plan was flawless. Their fleet included 4 powerful aircraft carriers, veterans of Pearl Harbor. Their pilots were among the most experienced in the world. Victory seemed not only possible, it seemed inevitable. As both fleets moved toward Midway, neither side could see the other. Thousands of square miles of ocean separated them. Yet every hour brought them closer together. The greatest naval trap of the Pacific War was quietly taking shape. Finding an enemy fleet in the Pacific was like finding a needle in a haystack. Reconnaissance aircraft launched from ships and islands, scanning endless waves below. Every pilot knew a single sighting report could decide the fate of nations. On Midway Atoll, soldiers prepared for attack. Anti-aircraft guns were checked. Aircraft were fueled. Defenses were strengthened. Everyone knew the island would soon become the center of a major battle, even if they didn't know exactly when. As June 4th approached, tension spread across both fleets. Sailors slept lightly. Pilots reviewed mission plans. Commanders studied maps again and again. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, history was waiting. Before sunrise on June 4th, engines roared across Japanese carrier decks. Aircraft launched one after another into the dark morning sky. Their mission was straightforward: destroy Midway and clear the way for Japan's final victory in the Central Pacific. Soon, Japanese aircraft arrived over Midway. Bombs fell across airfields and installations. Explosions shook the island. Smoke rose into the sky. For the men below, it was a terrifying sight. But despite the destruction, Midway remained in the fight. As Japanese aircraft returned from Midway, their reports brought unexpected news. The island had been hit hard, but it was not destroyed. Runways still functioned. Defenses remained active. Enemy aircraft were still operating. The mission was incomplete, and Japanese commanders faced a crucial decision. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo ordered reserve aircraft to be rearmed for another attack on Midway. Bombs and fuel were moved across carrier decks. Crews rushed to prepare aircraft. No one realized that this decision would soon place the entire fleet in grave danger. A Japanese scout plane finally transmitted a worrying message. Enemy ships had been sighted. At first, the report seemed incomplete. Details were missing. How many ships? What kind? The uncertainty created confusion at the worst possible moment. Should the carriers continue preparing a second strike against Midway? Or should they rearm their aircraft to attack the newly discovered American ships? Every minute mattered. Orders changed, aircraft were moved, bombs were removed and replaced. Precious time slipped away. American reconnaissance planes scanned the ocean relentlessly. The search area stretched for hundreds of miles. Then, at last, one pilot spotted what everyone had been hoping to find: a Japanese carrier force moving through the Pacific. The sighting report reached American commanders. The enemy had been found. There was no time to waste. Pilots were called to their aircraft. Engines roared to life. Across American carriers, men rushed into battle positions. American squadrons launched in waves. Fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers climbed into the air. Many pilots had little idea where the enemy actually was. They followed rough coordinates and hoped fuel would last long enough to find the fleet. The Pacific Ocean offered few landmarks and endless uncertainty, as several American formations became separated. Pilots searched desperately for the Japanese carriers. Fuel gauges slowly dropped. Every passing minute increased the risk of failure. American torpedo bombers were the first to reach the Japanese fleet. Flying low and slow, they headed directly toward heavily defended carriers. It was one of the most dangerous missions imaginable, yet they pressed forward without hesitation. Japanese fighters intercepted the incoming torpedo bombers. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire from every direction. The sky erupted with explosions and tracer rounds. Aircraft began falling into the sea. What followed looked less like a battle and more like a sacrifice. The American torpedo pilots knew the odds were against them. Their aircraft were slower than Japanese fighters and lacked strong protection. Yet they continued forward. One by one, they descended toward the carriers, determined to release their torpedoes no matter the cost. Japanese Zero fighters swept through the formation. Their pilots were experienced veterans, many of whom had fought across the Pacific. They attacked relentlessly, diving from above and firing at close range. American aircraft began disappearing from the sky. Explosions surrounded the torpedo bombers. Aircraft burst into flames. Some crashed into the ocean. Others pressed forward despite severe damage. The mission seemed hopeless, but every pilot understood that turning back would mean abandoning the attack. Entire squadrons were wiped out. The attacks achieved almost no direct hits. To Japanese commanders, victory seemed certain. The enemy's assault appeared disorganized and ineffective. But appearances can be deceiving. To stop the torpedo bombers, Japanese fighters had descended to low altitude. Their carefully organized defensive screen was breaking apart. Aircraft chased targets across wide sections of sky. Few people noticed the growing gaps overhead. Meanwhile, American dive bomber squadrons struggled to locate the enemy fleet. Fuel levels dropped dangerously low. Some pilots feared they might never find the carriers. Then, through a combination of luck and persistence, the search finally paid off. One American pilot noticed a Japanese destroyer speeding across the ocean. The ship appeared to be rushing towards something important. Trusting his instincts, he followed its course. The decision would lead directly to the Japanese carriers. Suddenly, the The clouds opened. Below lay the Japanese carrier force. Massive warships stretched across the ocean. Aircraft crowded the decks. Fuel hoses and munitions were still being moved. The fleet was exposed at exactly the wrong moment. The dive bombers had arrived almost unnoticed. Japanese fighters remained focused near sea level. Few defenders were positioned high enough to stop the incoming attack. For a brief moment, the carriers stood vulnerable beneath an open sky. Pilots rolled their aircraft downward and began steep attack dives. The ocean rushed upward. Carrier decks grew larger every second. Anti-aircraft fire erupted from below. Within moments, bombs would leave their wings and alter the course of the war. The dive bombers screamed toward the carriers at terrifying speed. Pilots gripped their controls as anti-aircraft fire burst around them. Below, Japanese sailors looked up and finally realized the danger. Alarms echoed across the fleet. There was almost no time left to react. A bomb struck the carrier Akagi's flight deck. The explosion alone was devastating, but the real danger came from what surrounded it. Fuel lines, armed aircraft, and ammunition were scattered across the deck. Fire spread almost instantly. As fire raced through the carrier, crew members fought desperately to contain it. Smoke poured into the sky. Aircraft loaded with fuel and bombs became deadly hazards. Every second increased the risk of an even larger catastrophe. Nearby, the carrier Kaga became the next target. Dive bombers lined up their attacks and released their payloads. Multiple explosions ripped through the ship. Within moments, sections of the carrier were engulfed in flames. What had started as a coordinated fleet operation was becoming chaos. Burning aircraft, exploding ammunition, and spreading fires transformed the carriers into floating infernos. Officers struggled to understand how the situation had deteriorated so quickly. The carrier Soryu was struck as well. Bombs exploded across its deck and hangars. Fires erupted throughout the ship. Within minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers had suffered catastrophic damage. The balance of the battle was changing before anyone could stop it. In a span of only a few minutes, Japan's most powerful carrier force had been crippled. The same carriers that helped attack Pearl Harbor were now burning across the Pacific. Years of training, planning, and experience were disappearing in smoke and fire. Japanese commanders watched the destruction unfold with disbelief. Only moments earlier, victory seemed within reach. Now, their strike force was fighting for survival. The carefully planned operation was collapsing faster than anyone thought possible. The carrier Hiryu had escaped the initial attack. Its decks remained operational. Its aircraft were still capable of fighting. For Japan, Hiryu represented the final opportunity to turn disaster into victory and strike back against the Americans. Hiryu launched wave after wave of aircraft against the American fleet. Pilots raced across the ocean determined to avenge their burning carriers. For a brief moment, Japan still had a chance to change the outcome of the battle. Hiryu's pilots eventually located the American fleet. Diving through clouds and anti-aircraft fire, they launched their attack. Bombs exploded near American ships. For the first time that day, the Americans felt the full force of Japan's remaining carrier power. American ships suffered damage, and sailors fought desperately to contain fires. Smoke drifted across carrier decks as rescue teams rushed into action. Although the Americans had gained the advantage, victory was far from guaranteed. American reconnaissance aircraft returned to the skies. Their mission was simple: find the last surviving Japanese carrier. If Hiryu escaped, the battle could continue. If it was destroyed, Japan's offensive would collapse completely. Late in the day, American pilots spotted Hiryu. Alone and vulnerable, the carrier sailed across the ocean, while smoke from the earlier battle lingered on the horizon. The Americans immediately prepared another strike. American dive bombers approached from above. Just as they had earlier in the day, pilots lined up their attacks and descended toward the target. Hiryu's anti-aircraft guns opened fire, but the bombers kept coming. Bombs struck the carrier with devastating accuracy. Explosions ripped through the flight deck. Fires spread rapidly across the ship. Within minutes, the last operational Japanese carrier at Midway was mortally wounded. By the end of the battle, all 4 Japanese carriers that had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor were doomed. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu. The backbone of Japan's elite naval air force had been shattered in a single operation. Before Midway, Japan had been advancing across the Pacific. After Midway, the momentum began to shift. The Empire would continue fighting for years, but it would never fully recover the pilots, carriers, and experience lost during those critical hours. Historians have often pointed to one astonishing fact. The decisive destruction of 3 Japanese carriers occurred within only a few minutes. Had the American dive bombers arrived slightly earlier or slightly later, the outcome could have been dramatically different. On June 4, 1942, over a remote stretch of the Pacific Ocean, history turned on a handful of minutes. 4 carriers were lost. An empire's momentum was broken. The balance of power shifted. Millions of future lives were affected by decisions, luck, courage, and timing. The Battle of Midway proved that sometimes the course of history is not decided over years or months, but in a few unforgettable minutes that changed the world forever. If those dive bombers had arrived just minutes later, history might have been completely different. Subscribe for more true military stories that change the world.